Hello. We suffer our better nature to pass, and for that we become something more than we thought that we could be. Bullying is an issue near and dear to a lot of us because of the negative stress from memories form some of the strongest of our first years in becoming a person. The way that we choose to deal with it is understated in our conception of how we grow as people. And research from the CDC for youth suicide and Yale University's Bullying Suicide Link Explored, a new study by researchers at Yale, articles, among others, describe how closely correlated suicide is to bullying. Bully victims are between 2 to 9 times more likely to consider suicide than non-victims. The dominance hierarchy doesn't just encompass human culture, it's found in species that we split from evolutionarily hundreds of millions of years ago. The attempt to bully someone is our pernicious psychological desire to satiate an attempt at control over our lives and our environment. Hero mythology is built around standing up to such figures who would attempt things in these communities. They would go out into the nature, slay the dragon, and save the people and goods he had taken and bring it back to the community. The person who could formulate the courage to benefit the people around him in that way was benefited beyond our ability to fathom. The quality of his life shot up immeasurably, he was given opportunity, and his breeding chances were improved significantly. If you want to be the hero in your own life, you're going to have to stand up to that bully. Does standing up to the bully mean a direct physical confrontation? No. Does it mean a direct social confrontation? Yes. How that is done and determined depends upon the context of the situation. You have both peers and adults who can help you in this. But what isn't recommended is letting it persist, and attempting to flee from it could have negative psychological consequences when it comes to the formulation of your character. What type of person runs away from a problem until it's beyond the horizon? One who is incapable of solving it. And so basically what I think is that if you're going to want to become the sort of person who can triumph over challenges in their life, you're going to have to stand up to negative social pressure in one way or another. In the absence of this, you're formulating a basis of character that is fundamentally flawed in some sort of aspect, and that's going to chase you your entire life. So I think that we definitely should stand up to bullies in whatever capacity that we can.
It's highly instructive that you use the term hero mythology, because what you have just recited is a mythology of bullying that is contradicted by every piece of research that we have available. In fact, the very mentality that you have just expressed, there will be negative psychological consequences to running away from bullies. If you want to be a hero in your own life, you're going to have to stand up to that bully. These are forms of mythology, and in fact, they are forms of victim blaming, something that we as a society have come to realize is bad, not only for solving problems like bullying, but for the very psychology of the victims that you say that you are concerned with. In this debate, I will be taking the con position, which is that standing up to bullies, confronting them directly as a victim, is not better than avoiding or ignoring bullies. As you have pointed out in your initial speech, this is a victim-focused inquiry. You have eloquently described what you believe a victim should do when faced with a bully. And your belief is that they should stand up to that bully like the mythological hero stands up to the dragon. In real life, the hero gets eaten by the dragon and tastes very good with ketchup. This is, in fact, the danger that a bullying victim runs when they submit to bullying by participating in it, by attempting to become a bully themselves. I'll be making 3 primary points against the idea that victims have some onus to stand up to bullies, physically or otherwise, as opposed to avoiding or ignoring the danger. First of all, demanding that victims of bullying do the standing up is does harm to the victims by blaming the victims for the imbalance of power they did not create and for a danger to themselves that they did not create. Second, I'll be discussing the research that shows avoiding bullies or ignoring the bullying behavior, in fact, works vis-a-vis victims. You've talked a lot about bullying when it comes to children. I'll also be discussing how research shows that bullies should be dealt with in the workplace, which shows that this problem is one that is not just connected to age, but that has universal solutions regardless of age. Third, I'll discuss the fact that to the extent bullies need to be stood up to, it needs to be done by authority figures dictating down to the bullies and not victims who are under the bully's foot trying to stand up for themselves. The bullying reside in changing power structures that victims are not capable of changing themselves and should not be expected to do so.
Okay, so you said that standing up to bullying is victim blaming. I find that to be palpably absurd, okay? When it comes to being a victim, let's just ask ourselves the question, what exactly is it to be a victim? To be a victim is to say, I am not in control of my life, and I can't gain control of my life. What exactly is the benefit in addressing yourself in this way, or addressing anyone in this way? And exactly what kind of sociopathic thought formulation does it take to render the idea of having an opportunity to build your character to be seen as victim blaming, and therefore must be able to avoid it? Avoiding a scenario like that and not being able to confront your bully in whatever capacity it is, which includes getting the help of peers and adults who can hopefully change the structure of power in ways that you're not able to, but is nevertheless a process that you're involved in and includes standing up to the bully. That's proven to be a character building exercise. And in society and in hero mythology and in history, we have seen example of people building their character when it comes to these problems. If we get rid of that mechanism today, what exactly is going to happen? If we got rid of that mechanism centuries ago, what exactly is going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen. The crumbling of society, because society is built and maintained by heroes. It's maintained by people willing to do things that no one else is willing to do. And that's literally how our society advances. And if we say that that mechanism we should just do away with that because it would be putting onus on someone being bullied to do something about it, would be victim blaming, and we can't let that happen. Well, that's just outsourcing the problem. You're outsourcing the problem away from the person who's supposed to directly fix it themselves. Are they supposed to fix it alone? No. But without creating strength and character in these situations, you have no strength of character in general in society. And if you want to do away with that, you're basically arguing in a very, very indirect way to do away with the entire species. Because let me tell you something. Hard times create good people, and good people create prosperous times. Prosperous times create weak people. And that's exactly the stage of society that we find ourselves in right now. And you're arguing for that to continue, which will create, incidentally, bad and weak character and an absence of character. And in that absence of character, I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't want to see that future.
The very conception of society that you've just enunciated is the conception of society that bullies take on. The idea that the thing you have to do to succeed is to dominate others who you perceive to be weaker than yourselves. Now, let's go back to a definition of victims. Your definition of victims has not so far been supported by any research. Several researchers, including Dr. Jana Juvonen, and Dr. Dan Olweus, both behavioral psychologists certified by the American Psychiatric Association, have defined victims of bullying as persons who suffer from a perceived or actual imbalance of power. Bullying is defined as 1, unwanted aggressive behavior, 2, intended to cause distress or harm. We'll come back to this. 3, that involves an imbalance of real or perceived power, and 4, that occurs repeatedly over time. Now, it's that intent to cause distress or harm that does a lot of damage to your argument, because society doesn't need people going around trying to harm others just so that they can get ahead in order to survive. In fact, we rather need the opposite, not just in this time, but in all times. You continue to put the onus on the victim, outsourcing the problem, you call it, when a victim seeks help. But in fact, one of my primary points, number one, avoiding bullies works versus participating. The cycle of bullying involves repetition. Submission creates that repetition. Submitting to the structure of bullying, of the bullying. Avoiding the bullies, on the other hand, breaks the cycle, especially if you are in a position to avoid the bully by going to someone in power who can remove you from the bullying situation. In the workplace, researchers recommend not hiring bullies in the first place, as opposed to trying to address bullying behavior when it continues to happen. There's one story of a doctor who it was discovered that he was a bully after the fact, and they told him, if you take this position, we're going to fire you immediately for being a bully. That made the bully go away, as opposed to demanding people address it. You say that that does some sort of damage to people's character, and yet when those bullies are allowed into the workplace in the first place, research says that up to 75% of people report that they lose productivity due to the very presence of the bully. And so submitting to the power structure is, in fact, the right character thing to do.
Okay, so you kind of explained that the bully can't, removing yourself from the situation is a good idea. I don't think that at all, okay? And this is why I don't think that. If you're going to have the bully just have his particular victim that he is exercising his pernicious psychological desires on, if you're just going to remove that from the situation, that's a neutral effort. That is an absence of effort in order to solve the actual problem when it comes to not just the victim being bullied, but the bully bullying people. He's just going to find another victim. But when it comes to diffusing the situation, which, by the way, the victim can only start that process. He's the only one who can start that process, because if you're getting bullied, you actually need to go to get help. And that you literally, there's literally no other way other than the direct observation of another party to begin the situation of diffusing the problem when it comes to a bullying situation. And so when you take a person out of that equation, the victim, all you've done is ended that particular situation. Another situation will arise because that psychological desire still remains. Now, when it comes to the idea of a direct social confrontation, if that is handled successfully, both by the victim, by his peers, and by adults, you're going to find yourself in a situation where that bully has faced immediate and excessive social shame when it comes to his negative behavior. That immediately causes the mind to sort of process, what am I doing? Is this the right thing to do? It's going to create negative social pressure on his negative psychological desire. That is a beginning of diagnosing and solving the problem and getting rid of bullies, instead of just removing their victims and continuing that process infinitely until they become, as you say, doctors. I don't find that to be a valid solution at all. And when it comes to the idea that victims can't and shouldn't do anything about it, and you're right to be just sort of someone who is not able to do anything about it, that's also a neutral claim when it comes to character development. What kind of person is that guy going to turn into? Well, I'm not saying he's necessarily going to turn into a negative person or build negative character, but it's going to be an absence of positive character, certainly. I think the more involved you are in the process of removing that bully and attempting to get help through social externalities, the better chance you have of formulating some character that's, worth having.
You keep making these references to character building, first in the victim and now in the bully. Victims cannot build characters in bullies. Only power structures can do that. It's a myth that bullies are somehow emotionally fragile and are just waiting for some sort of social cue or social correction. And it's a myth that's been broken down by psychological research. Every peer study on the issue finds that bullies, in fact, have ridiculously high self-esteem, as Professor Jana Juvonen of UCLA put it. They enjoy higher peer status, as Dr. Dorothy L. Espelage put it, in using research to prevent bullying. To the extent they are insecure and are looking for social cues, they don't even realize it, as Dr. Mary C. Lamia said in The Psychology of the Bully. They are supporters of violence. So if you point out to a bully, hey, you're being a bully, guess what? That's exactly what the bully is trying to do vis-a-vis the victim. The bully is not empathetic to the victim, according to the research. So the victim, a single victim, saying to a bully, you're a bully, not only has zero effect, it constitutes participating in the bullying. Again, this goes back to the fact that putting the onus on victims to stand up to bullies as individuals is not right for victims. Victims should not have to be concerned with building the characters of bullies. Victims should not have to be concerned with preventing the next victimhood. Victims should be concerned with preventing physical or emotional harm to themselves. You started off this debate talking about the suicide rate. It is ridiculous to say that a victim should continue to submit to the cycle of bullying, therefore increasing their own risk of suicidal thoughts or behavior and increasing the potential risk of physical harm to themselves for someone else's sake, when the research says they can't change things for themselves or others. Now, you keep trying to equivocate and saying, well, going to get help is a form of standing up. But that's basically co-opting the other side of this debate into your own debate. There's a dichotomy here that's demanded between avoiding or ignoring bullies, and an avoidance strategy is seeking third-party help versus standing up on one's own. Now, not only are victims powerless to change the immutable characteristics of the bully simply by standing up, they can't change their own immutable characteristics that contribute to the imbalance of power. The mythology that you're selling is that all a victim has to do is say, I'm tired of being bullied, and that somehow that's going to make them less disabled, less physically weak, less black or other minority, or less female. That's not going to happen, and it's not the onus on the victim to stop that.
Okay, you attempted to say that I'm equivocating when it comes to the idea of getting adult help. That was in my beginning statement, was, the idea of getting adult help or getting peer help when it comes to the confrontation with the bully. Now, when it comes to the removal of yourself from the situation, well, the removal of yourself from the situation is obviously the end goal of confronting a bully. Obviously, you're not going to defriend him. So I don't think that you're co-opting. I don't think that your claim that I'm co-opting the other side is a valid argument at all, because when it comes to confronting the bully, that includes a social confrontation and a willingness to diagnose the problem. The aspects of your argument that I don't accept are the idea that just running away from the problem on your own is going to build upon you properly, and that just submitting to the bullying is somehow going to make it stop. Now, I know you haven't actually supported that decision, but the idea that bullying happens to just women or minorities, that's something that I don't entirely accept at all, especially when it comes to the conception of 2017. In 2017, if you aren't progressive enough, you get bullied. You get bullied by this cultural scolds constantly telling you what you can and can't do, what you can and can't say. The idea that kids are getting bullied because they're minority or women, I'm not going to deny that that's happening somehow or somewhere at some point right now. But is that a cultural pervasive thing that's just as prominent or even somehow more prominent than it was decades ago? Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely garbage. In fact, I see that the whole cultural zeitgeist right now is the other way around. It's the other way around. If you're a straight white male, you're going to get dismissed because of your opinion on things. because you're straight white male. So the idea that people are getting bullied because they're women or because they're minorities, etc. I don't know why you inserted that, because that seems like just an absurd proposition to me on its face. Now, you mentioned that the getting involved in the confrontation, or just not having a confrontation and diffusing it, is a much better alternative. I don't accept your proposition at all, because when it comes to not just hero mythology and history, but the movies that we watch, the TV that we watch, everything is centered around this heroic idea of becoming something more than yourself and being able to diffuse a situation. Sometimes in movies that's demonstrated by direct confrontation of violence. I don't necessarily support that, but I don't directly and in all cases condemn it.
Well, we're back to referencing TV and movies, and something you said about an onus to become more than oneself. That's victim blaming. You're saying there's something fundamentally wrong with the victim and that they need to rise above that. That's not the case in the bullying dynamic. Again, it's not necessarily actual imbalance of power. It can be perceived. Furthermore, having less power doesn't make one less of a human being. It doesn't make one fundamentally flawed. You keep on with this mythology of some say you got to rise up. Well, that's not the reality that we live in. You are fine just the way you are is exactly the message we need to be sending to victims, and not you've got to be more than you are to overcome this person who is doing you harm. It's the harm doer who is wrong, not the person to whom the harm is being done. And by the way, when it concerns immutable characteristics, I never said it's only women, only minorities. It's certainly not only people who have immutable characteristics that cause them to become bullied. It's simply something that a victim, if that's one of the reasons they're being bullied, cannot change. A boy who is smaller than the other boys can't suddenly become larger. A female can't suddenly become male. A female who's being bullied by females can't suddenly become cool, etc., etc., and it's not on the victims. Now, something else that you said goes to my third point. You said, obviously, you're not going to befriend the bully. Actually, the research shows, and this is part of Dr. Dan Olweus' research, that a comprehensive plan from the top down, whether it's from school administrators or from management or from bosses or from parents, is how you alter the bullying dynamic. And that does involve improving communication between the bully and victims so that the bully is better able to communicate without becoming a bully. It involves warmth, positive interest, and involvement from adults, firm limits on unacceptable behavior, adults who act as positive role models, and consistent application of non-punitive and non-physical sanctions for unacceptable behavior. These are things that help bullying. In fact, fostering friendships between would-be bullies and would-be victims does help prevent bullying. This is also seen in the cost of incivility, the study I talked about in the workplace. When you foster civility, you undercut bullying. But the fostering of that civility comes not from the victim, but from the people responsible for the culture. The victim's onus is, one, to be comfortable with who and what they are despite the bullying, and two, to avoid the actual harm of the bullying. And there is no onus on the victim to rise up and become more than they are because they don't have to.
Okay, I am just absolutely blown away at this argument. This is absolutely ridiculous, okay? So, from a moral standpoint, let's say that you're completely right. Let's say that it is victim blaming and we need to be sending the message to the kids, as you said, that you are okay just the way that you are. Now, what would have happened to human society if we continued this message? If this message was just pervasive? Well, that sounds to me like there's going to be no character development or attempt to develop your character or attempt to solve any sort of problems. It's never your fault. You're always the best, and there's nothing you can do to improve yourself. Now, this is not just factually incorrect, but this is detrimental to the growth and health of society. And I don't accept it as a valid moral argument anyway, because saying that you need to become better is not necessarily saying that you are wrong in character. if I have one potato, and that was not necessarily enough for me to, not necessarily enough for me nutritionally, and I needed more. That doesn't mean that that one potato was bad for me. So saying that we all need to improve as people is not a indirect insinuation that we're bad, or that we're. It only demonstrates that we need to improve our character constantly. And if we have that attitude, if we have the attitude of demonstrating our character and developing it and improving ourselves, we're going to find that our lives are going to be a lot better, instead of saying something in my life is wrong right now, and since it's wrong right now, there's nothing wrong with me, and everyone else around me needs to fix it. This creates a victim mentality, and it's been criticized widely, because if you see yourself in that way, then you're just going to be demanding for more and more and more from society, until you're asking for things like, I don't know, safe spaces. So I don't think the idea of self-improvement is somehow victim blaming. That is the most sort of like pernicious and ridiculous like attempt at arguing for the fact that we don't need to improve as people. That is imminently obvious to anyone who's honest about the way that you need to walk through life. Is, yeah, you can get help sometimes, but sometimes you actually have to rely on yourself when it comes to solving problems that arises within your reality. And when it comes to your claim that adult reinforcement can solve a lot of these issues, I don't accept that at all. Bullies aren't necessarily rebellious, and bullies always snarked, as well as lots of other people. We always snarked at adult attempts to correct our behavior. I don't think that's a solution that'll fix itself.
You almost quoted word for word something that Dr. Jana Jovanin of UCLA said in her study. So I want to read this quote. 10 years ago, and even today in some parts of the country and in some families, there was a belief that bullying is just part of growing up, and that these experiences are even needed by the victims because they help build character. Every piece of research that I've cited, every piece of research that's been conducted by anyone in behavioral science, by anyone in childhood psychology, developmental psychology, has found that bullying does not build character. Participating in bullying does not build character. That bullying itself, in fact, causes harm that would otherwise not be visited upon victims. The continued refrain of your argument has been that victims need to stand up to bullies because there is something flawed in the victim, and they need somehow to improve themselves above that. The research is opposite. The research is that bullies target victims because they want to dominate them, not because there is something wrong with the victim that needs to be improved. The bully is not benevolent. The bully is attempting to cause harm. The bully is not empathetic. The bully does not care about the victim. The victim is not flawed. The victim is perceived to be flawed by the bully who is attempting to cause harm and who is attempting to select. The victim does not have to participate in the bullying. Participating in the bullying, in fact, makes the victim appear more weak, which only causes more bullying. Instead, what every single piece of research says, this is the APA's help desk for bullies, this is stopbullying.gov, which is run by the United States government, tells victims of bullying, avoid the situation if you can, be with other students or with adults, do not attempt to confront the bully because bullies are, as Dr. Dan Olonen said, more prone to anger, and it can cause harm to yourself. Workplace experts say either don't hire the bully or take the bully to the boss. School psychologists say take the bully to the principal. No expert, and you have cited none, says try to fight the bully. And certainly no expert says if you are a victim of bullying, you have some onus to fight the bully because it'll make you better or it'll save someone else. Victims of bullying need to save themselves from harm, and the universal way to do that is avoidance and getting help from a third party.
Said, fight the bully.